Welcome to St. Susanna Church on this historic day. My name is Stephen Gisoma, and I am here this day with Pat Ferrone, Teresa Lemaire, Eileen Gorman, Phil Mandeville, Aisha Uvase, and Abu Babuka to celebrate a remarkable achievement of human history and to invite all to join in the work that remains to be accomplished. This January 22nd, 2021 marks a milestone in our human journey as the United Nations Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons takes effect. This legally binding international ban on nuclear weapons represents a movement toward hope and sanity. To date, 51 states have ratified the treaty, accepting the principles of compliance on behalf of their countries and the people of the world. The Vatican was the first to ratify this treaty, an action consonant with Pope Francis' outspoken words of condemnation of the unspeakable horror of nuclear weapons. He said, "Weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons, create nothing but a false sense of security. They cannot constitute the basis for peaceful coexistence between members of the human family." 84 other states have signed on to the treaty as well, though without yet ratifying it. None of the 9 nuclear states, the United States, Russia, England, China, Israel, France, Pakistan, North Korea, nor the umbrella states associated with them have embraced its terms. Instead, they continue to urge countries against compliance.
In this era of increasing global interdependence and vulnerability, our faith invites us to seek the common and universal good. In Pope Francis's recent encyclical Fratelli Tutti, he says, "We are all saved together, or no one is saved." Is it possible, he adds, for us to be open to our neighbors within a family of nations? The Pope and we recognize that international cooperation is essential for addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, the gap between rich and poor, and the universal threat of nuclear weapons. Today, as the treaty enters into force, we, along with Pax Christi USA and other peacemakers, celebrate this milestone and look forward to the day when all the nations of the world, including the nuclear-armed nations, will ratify this treaty and at last and forever abolish nuclear weapons. As part of our program, we'd like to show you a couple of videos that will be of interest to you. One is from ICAN, which is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. This organization has worked tirelessly on behalf of the abolishment, and they try to stigmatize, prohibit, and eliminate nuclear weapons. They are the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for all their work. The second video is of Dr. Ira Helfand on what would be the consequences if a nuclear bomb was dropped on Boston. He too is a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, along with others, for the creation of the U.S. affiliate of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War.
Good morning. A generation ago, millions of people around the world understood the full extent of the danger we faced from nuclear weapons. But unfortunately, that understanding has been lost largely. A whole generation has come of age which did not live through the Cold War and really was never taught about these weapons. And people of my age who didn't used to know this stuff in the past have pretty effectively erased it from our minds. So this is a wonderful conference for bringing attention back to this issue. And I want to start this morning by just describing what would happen as the direct effects of a modern nuclear war. We're all familiar with the image of Hiroshima after the nuclear bombing there. And we have to understand this is not what the world will look like after a modern nuclear war. Hiroshima was one small bomb, about 15 kilotons, 15,000 tons of TNT. A modern attack on a city like Boston would involve not one bomb, but perhaps 10 or 12, each of them anywhere from 10 to 50 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. It's difficult to describe 10 or 15 bombs going off all at the same time, so I'm going to use a model of a single explosion, a single 20 megaton bomb, 20 million tons of TNT. The megatonnage is actually a little bit bigger than would probably fall on Boston. The destruction that I'm going to describe is actually an underestimate because you cause more damage by spreading out the bombs more efficiently over a large area. But I think it gives an adequate understanding of the magnitude of the danger that we face. So a 20 megaton bomb going off over the State House in downtown. Within 1/1000th of a second, a fireball would form, reaching out for 2 miles in every direction, engulfing everything, including the building we're sitting in a fireball, which the temperatures within this would rise to up to 20 million degrees Fahrenheit, which is hotter than the surface of the sun. And everything would be vaporized. The buildings, the people, the trees, the upper level of the earth itself would disappear. To a distance of 4 miles in every direction, the blast would generate overpressures of 25 pounds per square inch and winds in excess of 600 miles per hour. Mechanical forces of that magnitude can destroy anything that people can build. Underground shelters collapse when they're exposed to pressures this great. To a distance of 6 miles in every direction, the heat would be so intense that automobiles would melt. To a distance of 10 miles in every direction, we're out now to the 128 Beltway, the winds would still be greater than 200 miles per hour. The blast pressure is still greater than 10 pounds per square inch. Forces of that magnitude will level masonry buildings, wooden frame buildings. A building like this would see the walls and the floors swept out. There'd be a steel skeleton left behind. To a distance of 16 miles in every direction, and note I've had to change the scale of the map to accommodate this zone of destruction. To a distance of 16 miles in every direction, the heat would still be so intense that everything flammable would burn. Paper, cloth, gasoline, wood, heating oil, plastic, it would all ignite causing hundreds of thousands of fires, which over the next half hour would coalesce into a firestorm, 32 miles across, covering over 800 square miles. Within this entire area, the temperatures would rise to 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. All of the oxygen would be consumed, and every living thing would die. In the case of Boston, we're talking about something on the order of 3 million people dead in a half an hour. Beyond this firestorm, the destruction would continue. To a distance of 19 miles, people standing outside would suffer third-degree burns on any exposed skin. To a distance of 21 miles, second-degree burns. To a distance of 40 miles, people who turned reflexively to look at the sudden flash of light would be blinded. There would be hundreds of thousands of casualties, all kinds of injuries. People blinded, as I mentioned, people made deaf by having their eardrums ruptured, people suffering penetrating wounds as shards of glass flew through the air, people with mechanical injuries and crush injuries from being thrown themselves through the air or being trapped under collapsing buildings. And most especially, there would be people with burns, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people with major burn injuries. They would all need urgent medical attention, and that care would not be available. In the entire United States, there are about 2,000 burn beds. Here in the Boston area, there are 3 institutions, between them 46 burn beds for hundreds of thousands of patients. And all 3 of these facilities are in the zone of complete destruction. In fact, almost all of the hospitals in the metropolitan area would be destroyed. Most of the doctors would be dead. Most of the nurses would be dead. There'd be no electricity to power EKG machines, X-ray machines. What few little supplies were not destroyed, blood products, antibiotics, pain medicine, would be used up in the first minutes of dealing with this catastrophe. There'd be no EMS system to transport people to hospitals. And in fact, the vast majority of the people who were injured would also die. And if this attack were part of a large-scale war between the United States and Russia, this same level of destruction would be visited on every major city in both countries. A study which we published in 2002 showed that if only 300 of the 1,500 warheads that the Russians maintain on hair trigger alert hit urban targets in the United States, 75 to 100 million people would be dead in the first half hour. In addition, the entire economic infrastructure of the country would be destroyed. All the things that we depend on to maintain our population. We're not hunter-gatherers or subsistence farmers. We need an intact society to live, and that society would be gone. The internet would be gone, the electric grid, the public health system, the food distribution system. None of this would exist anymore. And it is probable that in the months following this nuclear war, the vast majority of the American and Russian people who did not die in the initial attack would also die from exposure, from starvation, from radiation poisoning, from epidemic illness. All told, perhaps 500,000 people, 500 million people rather. And as my colleague, Professor Roebuck, will explain in his talk, these direct effects are only a part, and incredibly enough, only a small part of the damage that will be caused by nuclear war. So why talk about this? Well, for 2 reasons. First, because if we do not take action, this is the future that will be. This is going to happen. We've been told for 25 years that we don't need to worry about nuclear war between the United States and Russia. Well, even during that period, we knew that there could be an accident. And there have been at least 5 occasions since the early 1980s when either Moscow or Washington prepared to launch nuclear war in the mistaken belief that it was already under attack. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we've also come to understand that the assurances we received that deliberate nuclear war between the US and Russia was impossible, those assurances were hollow. The crisis in Ukraine has made it clear that the United States and Russia could end up on opposite sides of a military conflict. And since that crisis began, there's been unbelievable nuclear saber rattling on both sides. The Russians have threatened repeatedly to use nuclear weapons in response to this crisis, and NATO, for its part, has conducted military exercises very close to Russian borders using nuclear-capable forces. It is an extremely dangerous situation, and has led leaders on both sides to warn that the danger of nuclear war today is greater than at any time in the past, greater than it was during the 1980s. That's one reason why we need to talk about this. The other and more important reason is that this is not the future that must be. We don't have to go down this route. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. They're not an act of God. We've built them with our own hands, and we know how to take them apart. All that has been missing is the political will to do this. And fortunately, over the last few years, a new, powerful international movement has developed, calling for the stigmatization, prohibition, and abolition of nuclear weapons. It's led, by the countries which do not currently have nuclear weapons, the non-nuclear weapons states, which have come to understand that they cannot rely on the United States and the other nuclear powers to meet their obligations under Article 6 of the NPT, that they, the non-nuclear weapons states, have to provide leadership. They've come together in a series of 3 very important intergovernmental conferences, the last of which was attended by 158 nations. Government conferences to discuss just this kind of information. What is going to happen if there actually is a nuclear war? And all 3 of these conferences have concluded with the obvious understanding that these weapons must be eliminated before they're used. At the United Nations last fall, 130 plus countries voted to establish what was called an open-ended working group to address the current gap in international law, which does not yet prohibit possession of these weapons. That open-ended working group is meeting in Geneva. It had its first session in February. It will convene again in May, and it is probable that it will recommend to the General Assembly this fall a new treaty banning the possession of nuclear weapons, defining their possession to be illegal, something which can change the entire tone of the international conversation about nuclear weapons and put unprecedented pressure on the nuclear weapon states to live up to their obligations under Article 6 and to sit down and negotiate a real binding nuclear weapons convention, providing for the detailed steps to eliminate these arsenals. This is an extraordinary opportunity. Unfortunately, here in the United States, there's been almost a blackout about this process. There's been very little attention paid to it. And that becomes, I think, our job, to figure out how to build support for this international movement and how to take advantage of this international movement to put pressure on our government to meet its obligations and to eliminate its nuclear arsenal. This is a tremendous responsibility. It is a huge burden that sits on our shoulders. We are literally responsible for the fate of the earth. But if this is a great burden, I think it is also something of a gift that has been given to us. Every one of us wants to do something good with our life. We have been given the opportunity to save the world, and that is a very good thing to do. It says in Deuteronomy, it's reported in Deuteronomy, that God said, "Behold, I have put before you life and death. Therefore choose life, that you and your children might live." That is literally the choice before us today, before all of humanity. And so let us, in our work today, dedicate ourselves to choosing wisely and to acting with courage and determination so that indeed our children might live. I want to thank you for coming to this meeting this morning. This is a difficult topic to talk about. It's a difficult way to spend a day. But even more, I want to thank you for the work which I know you're going to do after today. No one of us is expected to do this job all by ourselves, but every one of us is expected to do that part of the job which falls to us to do. And that is our individual responsibility in this situation. Thank you very much.
We'll take a couple of questions right now, and then we can have more questions later on. There's 2 mics there, if you can go up to the mic. Just speak loud.
Okay, Professor, I'm just wondering, in terms of persuading people to join us, the average person in the street. Now, I remember in the 1980s, there were 2 films, one American, The Day After, and the horrific British film called Threads. And I'm just wondering if such films should make a comeback or be remade, to sometimes convince people with images such as we see, and movies such as that.
I think it would be great. It would be great if we were able to get more films especially popular films, out about this subject. I think the reason why these weapons still exist is threefold. First of all, people don't believe that this can really happen. And secondly, they don't understand how bad it will be if it does happen.
And the third thing is people don't understand who can do that. And that's something that happens. We're going to move on. Thank you.
We offer heartfelt thanks to all who work to resist all that diminishes the lives of the human community and to save this earth, our common home. We affirm now with deep appreciation the courage of these 51 countries who are prophets of peace and possibility for a safe world, free from the fear of nuclear weapons.
Antigua,
Austria,
Bangladesh,
Belize,
Benin,
Bolivia,
Botswana,
Cook Islands,
Costa Rica,
Cuba,
Dominica,
Ecuador,
El Salvador,
Fiji,
Gambia,
Guyana,
Holy See,
Honduras,
Ireland,
Jamaica,
Kazakhstan,
Kiribati,
Leo People's Democratic Republic,
Lesotho,
Malaysia,
Maldives,
Malta,
Mexico,
Namibia,
Nauru,
New Zealand,
Nicaragua,
Niue,
Palau,
Panama,
Paraguay,
St. Kitts and Nevis,
St. Lucia,
St. Vincent and Grenadines,
Samoa,
San Marino,
South Africa,
State of Palestine,
Thailand,
Trinidad and Tobago,
Tuvalu,
Uruguay,
Vanuatu,
Venezuela,
Vietnam,
My name is Takato Mishishita, and I am one of the survivors from Nagasaki. I come to you with my testimony and with a warning. Please listen. Don't go to school today, my mother said. Why, my sister asked. Just don't. Air raid alarms went off regularly back then. On August 9th, however, there was no air raid alarms. It was an unusually quiet summer morning with clear blue skies as far as the eye could see. It was on this peculiar day that my mother insisted that my older sister skip school. She had a bad feeling. This had never happened before. My sister begrudgingly stayed home while my mother and I, age 6, went grocery shopping. Everyone was out on their verandas, enjoying the absence of piercing warning signals. Suddenly, an old man yelled, "Plane!" Everyone scurried into their homemade bomb shelters. My mother and I escaped into a nearby show. As the ground began to rumble, she quickly tore off the tatami flooring, tucked me under it, and hovered over me on all fours. Everything turned white. We were too stunned to move for about 10 minutes. When we finally crawled out from under the tatami mat, there was glass everywhere and tiny bits of dust and debris floating in the air. The once clear blue sky had turned into an inky shade of purple and gray. We rushed home and found my sister. She was shell-shocked, but fine. Later, we discovered that the bomb was dropped a few meters away from my sister's school. Every person in the school had died. My mother, single-handedly, had saved both me and my sister that day. Now that I have reached old age, please permit me to speak to the young of the world. Dear young people who have never experienced war, wars begin covertly. If you sense it is coming, it is too late. Within the Japanese Constitution, you will find Article 9, the International Peace Clause. For the past 75 years, we have not maimed or been maimed by a single human being in the context of war. We have flourished as a peaceful nation. Japan is the only nation that has experienced a nuclear attack. We must assert with far more urgency that nuclear weapons cannot coexist with mankind. The current administration is slowly leading us toward war. I'm afraid, at the ripe age of 82, I have taken it upon myself to speak out against nuclear proliferation. Now is not the time to stand idly by. Average citizens are the primary victims of war always. Dear young people who have never experienced war, I fear that some of you may be taking this hard-earned peace for granted. I pray for world peace. Furthermore, I pray that not a single Japanese citizen falls victim to the clutches of war ever again. I pray with all my heart.
We call on the U.S. bishops, priests and deacons, women and men religious, and lay people throughout the U.S. Catholic Church to visibly observe in our dioceses, parishes, universities, and schools the entry into force of the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, with public calls for action, the offering of prayers, and legislative advocacy. The month following the entry into force on January 2nd, today, can be used as a time of education and reflection, addressing the treaty and Catholic social teachings on nuclear abolition through sermons and discussion groups, webinars, lesson plans, prayers of the faithful, and more. Pax Christi USA is ready to help with these resources. On this historic day, we join with Pope Francis in our conviction that a world without nuclear weapons is both possible and necessary. And we extend our gratitude to the nations who have demonstrated such leadership in ratifying this treaty. We take encouragement from their example and pledge to continue this vital work in the hope that one day our nation too may sign and ratify the treaty. May we become prophets of peace who resist all that diminishes the human community and who work to save our common home, this God-given, beautiful earth. Because we must all live with hope that our own lives and efforts will hasten the end of violence as a means of settling disputes, let us imagine ourselves into a more loving future for all people and for our dear world.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace.
You might say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Hope someday you'll join us, and the world will leave us one.
Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You
may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday